Thank you, Kevin, for coming on and joining me on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now. You are the founding executive editor and now senior maverick at Wired Magazine. You've written many books, including the bestseller, The Inevitable, and most recently, Excellent Advice for Living, which is what we're going to focus on mostly today. You also do a weekly podcast called Cool Tools. Done a lot of writing and speaking over the years, sort of like what we're doing now, although not so many podcasts, I hope, and hopefully we can change something up a little bit and give listeners and some of your true fans some, unique information that they haven't been able to get elsewhere. But it's great to have you on. I think the best place to start would be for those who don't know you or don't know you well, to just hear your story from as early as you're willing to start to where you are today and talk about, some of the decisions you made along the way.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my life and what I know, and maybe even some bits of advice. I grew up in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, suburb of New York City, a town called Westfield, New Jersey, for those who are counting. And that is, I spent most of my childhood in suburban areas. But it was in the 50s and the 60s, and it's really hard to understand how parochial life was back then, how, in some senses, isolated we were from the rest of the world, and how impoverished we were in terms of information. While we were a middle-class family, it was really hard to find out anything. To learn anything, and I was very interested in learning. I gravitated to local library, where I had my first job was at a local library, being the page. That was the person who kind of went down to the basement to get the old magazines or reshelved books. And but even that library was, compared to what we know now or what we can know, was just like a desert. Very, very little information. And so all my life I was making things. I was a maker as a kid, made railways, later on made a nature museum that with exhibits and all kinds of demonstrations of natural history and ultraviolet glowing rocks and all kinds of stuff that I had people helping me collect, kids in the neighborhood collecting stuff. And eventually went on to make a chemistry lab and really got into science in high school. So I was always making things, but it was so hard to learn and find out to find things, or I didn't have any money to buy things, and that was even more of a problem. But there was compared again to what even an ordinary person with that much money, if you have a phone, what you could learn was mind-boggling. And I would just been in total euphoric heaven if it had been like that when I was growing up. So that was the thing that I remember the most in retrospect, was my constant need for information, for tapping friends about how to do things, and looking for books on how to do things, and writing away for catalogs and learning how to do things, and having been so difficult to do that. And that kind of played a little bit of a part of my life later on, where I became involved in disseminating that kind of information with the Whole Earth catalog, and later with the online world, and later with Wired and the websites, and today with my newsletters, where we give out information for free. Sign up for it and you can get this. And so this kind of packaging of ideas and sharing is sort of what I was interested always as a kid. I made newsletters. We had a band that didn't play music, and I made a music video and a newsletter for the band. And so my first job overseas was working for a company doing the company newsletter. So I've always kind of been interested in this sharing of information and distributing information and helping people learn stuff. And of course, this book right now of advice is in that same vein of trying to be helpful, trying to tell you something that might be helpful, because I remember a time when getting any kind of information was so difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk on other podcasts I've listened to and sort of get at it from a few different angles in the book, how, it's important to define success for yourself and to create your own success metrics. You had a quote in the book, "Don't measure your life with someone else's ruler." And someone had asked you sort of like, what was your definition of success for yourself? And I think you said something along the lines of like, it's all oriented around what you're saying, this theme of what you're saying, learning yourself and sort of facilitating collective learning for the world, things like that. And to your point, the world has changed quite a bit since you were growing up in terms of the availability of information and the cost to access it and things like this. And not only have you been able to observe that from like a unique point of view, and a very interested point of view, sort of craving that as a kid and then getting more and more of it, as you've grown older, but you've also been at sort of the very center of it as it's been developing, like you said, Whole Earth Catalog, Wired, etc., doing the newsletter for free, everything like that. How have you sort of, what's your observations of the evolution of this? Because it didn't just go from sort of 0 to 1 in terms of like, there's no information, it's a total desert, to, Chat GPT. Obviously, there was like a lot in between. Were there inflection points that you can recall from, from your life, basically, where, Google came out and that was like a big one, mobile became the big thing? Were there certain inflection points that were big, or was it just this gradual sort of, inch by inch progress over the course of your life that has gotten from sort of 0 to 1 where we are today?
For me, I think the first hint that there was an acceleration of the information was in my encounters or after high school of the Whole Earth Catalog, which for the first time was directly trying to address this poverty of information at large, particularly the how-to instructional kinds of things, the self-help, the do-it-yourself. And that's what it was. It was kind of the Bible for do-it-yourselfers, not because it actually had information in it. It was primarily a catalog of the other books that you could buy by mail order that would tell you this kind of information about how to build your house yourself, about how to do homeschooling for your kids, by how to become a beekeeper, by how to start a business, all these things that your local library did not have, and your local bookstore certainly did not have, were available by mail using this catalog, and then they were and the books and other tools. You could just order by mail, and there was a whole industry called mail order catalogs, which we don't really pay much attention to anymore. But that was the thing. You sent away a postcard, you got a catalog, and then you could order from the catalog and it would be sent to you by mail. And so this was the whole catalog was sort of the catalog of the catalogs. It was telling you, it was a kind of Uber clearinghouse of where all this stuff was hiding, so to speak. And then it would also kind of run articles about inventing your life and kind of ways in which you could take control over your own destiny and do amazing things that you didn't think you could do. And I eventually got roped into it because I was traveling later on and I wanted to write for them. And the only thing I knew anything about that other people didn't know was about budget traveling. Not like a tourist, but like a real hardcore traveler, who kind of takes local third-class buses and sleeps in dorms and eats whatever the locals are eating. And I became an expert at that. So I started writing for the Whole Earth Catalog about travel, how to travel all the Himalayas for very little money, traveling in that way. And that was the first instance I saw where there was a hope for the future and you could find information. And later on, Steve Jobs and other people noticed that it was sort of like the internet on newsprint, because all that information in these catalogs were sent in by readers. So the readers would send in, a lot of readers would send in, and then they would publish it, and you would come back, you subscribe to it, without advertising. And it was get better and better as more people saw it and contributed their own little tiny bit. They might know one little thing and they added it to the mix. So it was a kind of a user-generated content like the internet was. So that was the first hint that this was possible. And it was always in the mind of the creator, Stuart Brand, that it'd be done electronically, that ideally it wouldn't be just printed on a book. It would be kind of a service you could maybe call up on a phone, or because that's all we had at the time. And you get the information that way. When the same group of people, I worked then at the place, I liked it so much, and I worked with Stuart, we started the first public access to the internet, which was very, very, very recent and very, very young, to facilitate this, to kind of make this information exchange possible. And that was the second, I guess, epiphany that I saw, was we made these bulletin boards and people could post anything. It was asynchronous, meaning you would post when you could and someone else would come back and read it later and maybe reply to it. And it would kind of hang there until the next person replied. That was a thread that was entirely novel at the time. There was no other metaphor. There was nothing else really like it. And I just thought that the encouragement, the help, the exchange of information, and the potential for this was just enormous, even though a lot of people at the time didn't believe it was going to be very mainstream. And they were right until the web came along. And again, that's maybe the third epiphany, seeing what websites could be and the amount of information that you could put up and anybody could put up and then anybody could find. It was like, okay, now we're talking. Now we have the real Library of Alexander for modern times. It's not like CD-ROMs, which were kind of interesting, but not really what we wanted. But this web thing was the real deal. And Wired was actually involved in basically inventing the web development. We invented the click-through ad banner for the web. There was just lots of things that were being invented to, again, facilitate this democratization, this decentralization, and the spread of any kind of information you needed. And we're still benefiting from that. And I guess the fourth bit in this prong is the invention of YouTube, which I think is really underrated in terms of being able to convey that. And now my big book collection that I had from Whole Earth of all the how-to books are basically completely superseded by YouTube. You can find much better, more recent, and easier to find information on YouTube than you can find in my whole 2-story library here of how-to books. And finally, you mentioned AI. Yeah, AI is going to transform this again once more with things like the chatbots, where you can use the conversational interface and ask and you kind of query closely, have a conversation with, and find out whatever you need. And I think we're headed into like this, this from my point of view, the fifth level of this information dissemination, of being able to find out and do things on your own. It's just, I don't think we really appreciate how important it is and how fast this is accelerating change and learning in the world at large. Just the degree to which being able to learn something and then disseminate it and have it reach the people who are interested. And then within days, they've taken that and improved it and they've posted it. And that's that cycle, which used to take years of people waiting to write books that had to be copy edited and then printed up and distributed. Years later, the information would be. Now it's days, if not hours later. And that has really sped up the collective learning of our civilization.
Well, that's a really interesting answer, and I appreciate you sharing it in such a sort of comprehensive way each step of the way. It's obviously I'm a bit younger. I haven't witnessed all of these inflection points myself, and to hear your perspective, being very much a part of each step of it. It's just really interesting. But obviously, with all of the information that there now is at your fingertips, YouTube, whatever else it might be, the challenge, I think, for me and a lot of others, is focus and, filtering out what you want to pay attention to versus what you want to ignore. You're just constantly sort of bombarded, whether it's social media or recommended videos on YouTube or whatever it might be, with stuff that may be kind of interesting, but like it's not really where you want to spend your time. And somehow you have to be able to like just focus on all of this, and everything seems to be sort of like short-term attention span, and not everything. Podcasts are an example of like a longer form thing, but tweets and TikToks and whatever else it might be. You talked a bit in your book about the importance of focus. Have you found ways, as this world has changed around you, to hone in on your focus and improve it over time? Has it been sort of tested with these new tools in the ways that like I'm talking about? Or how do you think about focus overall, and just practical, tools that you've found to be able to enhance it?
Yeah, I think as we make a world with more and more opportunities and options, more and more different things that we're interested in as a society, and the more stuff that we produce, we're certainly expanding the options of where we can give our attention, which is the one scarcity that remains. Where the billionaire still will have exactly the same amount of time as you do. They can't buy any more time, really. And so that is the scarcity. And it's being spread, so to speak, or beckoned by an increasing number of different options and avenues, but we, are limited in it. So we want to use this precious resource of attention in a wise way. And I find the focus is not so much a matter of, what's the word I want? Excluding everything else. There are periods of time when you do need to do that, but I find that the best way to harness this precious resource is not necessarily in the sense of kind of like focus as we are heads down. I have earphones on. I'm not hearing anything. I'm only thinking about having my eyes just, straight ahead. That kind of a focus. I think another way of focusing that I like to do is this idea of returning to something over and over and over again, like a habit, like a daily thing, where you do it on a ongoing basis. And the writers talk about writing 500 words a day, which may only take you an hour. But this idea that if you do an hour a day over a year, you can write a book. And it's that variety of focus that I find useful in today's world. It's not as if you were going to lock yourself in a cell and not come out until a year later when you produce a book. It doesn't work that way. It's just like this. It's just not even the best way to do it. And so, so focusing, I think, is made most practical in a kind of a more of a habitual sense than it is by an isolation sense where you are not doing anything. I do think that part of focus is learning how to say no politely and gently and firmly, and maybe having some understanding of an appreciation of saying no, of learning to do it often and well, which is a very difficult thing when you're starting out. And in fact, you do probably want to say yes to things a lot when you're starting out. There's a great YouTube channel called Yes Theory, which is this idea of people saying yes to as many things as you can. And I think when you're starting, that's a better profile. But as you gain some traction and you want to begin to learn how to say no as well as yes, and then you actually eventually want to be able to say no mostly. And saying no is not so much the distractions. It's not the little like procrastination distractions. That's not the problem. The problem is that you're going to be offered many opportunities of serious stuff that's good, that you would like doing, that you would enjoy doing, that may even pay you. But they're not the thing that you should be doing because someone else could do them. And so that is the distraction, that you aren't focused on the main thing, which is trying to truly become yourself.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, and I wouldn't have predicted focus going in that direction, but it's really interesting to go there. I think probably my single favorite part from the book, maybe it was because I saw it highlighted before I even read the book, but then after reading the whole thing, I was like, yep, that's still my favorite part, was don't be the best, be the only.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a blog post that included this among other sort of pieces of advice that I found relevant just a couple of weeks ago. Again, that was actually before I read the book. And I'm curious how you discovered that. A lot of people want to be great at something, some established path of some sort. Your parents are doctors, encouraging you to be a doctor. You want to be a doctor, you go to the best med school you can, be the best doctor you can, etc. This applies across many different disciplines and everything like that. But especially sort of in the modern world with the internet and all the unique different types of things that you can do, that seems to be a much longer list of many harder to define things than used to maybe exist. It seems that this opportunity to be the only and truly find something that you are capable of doing better than anyone else in the world because of sort of a combination of your passions and interests and natural skills and gifts, if you want to call them, whatever it might be. All of these things combine, who you are sort of combines to allow you to excel at something, at least have the potential to excel at something that just no one else can do. Was this something that you realized at some point in life, or did you sort of reflect and realize that this was what you were doing all along, or did you see it in others? I'm just curious to sort of elaborate and expand on this point that I think is super important, and I'm certainly focused pretty heavily on it at this stage of my life personally.
I think it is one of those bits, to use a subtitle of my book, wisdom that I wish I'd known earlier. So I came kind of late to this understanding, and I came through it curiously through editing Wired, the magazine that we co-founded. And we'd have story meetings at least once a month, and everybody's pitching stories, and the best stories were ones that the editors, would come up with an idea, and then we try to find a writer to do the writing, to go out and do the reporting and the writing. They'd have an assignment. And what I observed was there were several times when I had what I thought was a great idea that nobody else thought was very good at all. It was like, they didn't like it, didn't think it was important, or that it would work, or whatever. They would just, nope, get no traction whatsoever. And so I would say to myself, well, okay, must not have been a very good idea. I get more ideas. And there would go on. I would put it aside, kind of like kill it. And then oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes a year later, the idea would come back. It was like, that was a good idea. I really think we should do it. But it would also, again, sometimes not get any traction, anybody else agreeing with the idea that it was a good idea. And I would have to then kind of, again, try and get rid of it. It's like, okay, that doesn't work. I got to stop thinking about this. And then occasionally it would come back for a third time, and I would try to attempt to sell it again. And then when that happened more than once, I kind of slowly realized that, well, if I think it's just a great idea, when do I have to write? When do I write it? This is an idea that I need to write. And those would often turn out to be my best pieces. And it was this realization that it was my only. It was it was working because nobody else could write it, or they didn't think it was important enough, or they weren't capable of it, or they weren't interested. But for whatever reason, this was the only. I'd been trying to give it away and couldn't give it away. And so when I was writing it, it was easy. It was something I found easy, other people found hard, and there was no competition. I've been trying to give it away for a long time, so there was nobody else I didn't have to look over my shoulder to be concerned about. And so I learned from that experience that that's really what I need to be doing in my life as a whole, is not just doing the things that I could do, that I would enjoy doing, that I'm good at doing, that I get paid to do, but all those need to be true. And I should be working on the things that only I could do, the only things that I would do. And that was a really important turning point. And again, I wished I had known it earlier. Of course, the problem with that is that the young, including myself, have great difficulty figuring out what it is that we're good at. We don't really know what we can do that others can't. We don't know what we find easy and others find hard. But that's one of the reasons why when you're young, you want to try lots of different things, is that you're on a search to see and discover about yourself what it is that your talents and abilities and life experiences are pointing to. So you have to keep doing different things. And that's why when you're young, your life should be kind of a meandering patchwork of things as you try different kinds of stuff, as you test different things. You do want to try to work to have some mastery of something that gives you a platform to kind of keep moving it in different directions, like whether it's doctoring, or whether it's being able to fix stuff, whether it's writing, whether it's cooking, some skill that you become really, really expert at. And with deliberate practice, that enables you, that gives you a little platform to stand on to try these other things. So that was my story of how I came to understand that you don't really want to aim to be the best, because that's a very limited position. There can only be the number one best golf player or trombone player in the world, and you're not always going to be one. You can be displaced very easily to number 2 or 3 or whatever. And so rather than aim for the best, which is someone else's definition of success, is someone else's movie, it's a well-defined path, you want to head in the other direction towards the unknown, in some senses, towards somewhere that's closer to what you can do and others can, or what you find easy and others find hard, and where there's more of a chance of you kind of finding that role where people find what you do interesting or valuable. And it's not a destination. You won't arrive there. I haven't arrived there. I'm on my way. I'm in that right direction. I'm in the vicinity. But it'll take most of your life to get there. You don't ever really arrive. You're just constantly moving in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I couldn't have predicted that answer at all. It's very surprising, I guess, to hear that realization came out of coming up with ideas for articles at Wired and not, basically having a difficult time convincing anyone it's interesting enough to write about. And the specific piece that you sort of drew from that about, obviously you want to do something that you're good at and you're interested in and everything like that. But I didn't think of it so specifically as like one sort of flag or signal that you could be in an area of something that, you know, you can be the only one doing is literally like disinterest of others. Like you tell people and you tell people and you tell people, and no one seems to care or think it's a good idea at all.
Right.
Is that's a reasonable signal, you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's another piece of advice in the book. My excellent advice for living is that when you're young, especially, try to work on somewhere where there's no name for what it is that you're doing. There's no title, there's no occupation, there's no words, maybe, where it may take you, as you say, a long time to explain to somebody else what it is that you're actually up to, and they may not even understand. And that's actually a good sign, because that's indicating that you're more likely to be kind of on your path to being the only, versus like if you're on a career path, everybody knows what an accountant looks like, but you're headed to becoming, you know, like 15 years ago to be like a podcaster. You couldn't explain that to your mom. What it was that. Now it's like something in AI, you're a prompt engineer, or whatever it is. They don't even have good names for it. And that's a good sign that you might be at a frontier as well. We're at the beginning of something that will be important later on. Eventually the names and the language will catch up. So yeah, you want to head out and, as much as possible, invent your definition of success. I mean, that's the problem with those other proven career paths. There's someone else's successes. They've been proven by other people, and it's very unlikely that you were going to fit into that mold. And you're kind of trying to squeeze your life into someone else's definition of success. You'll have more likely to have success and achieve that, and maybe contentment and happiness, if you are trying to invent your own definition of success. Brian Eno, somebody that we have correspondence with, likes to talk about this idea of instead of like trying to aim your life like you're an arrow and arrive in the bull's ring, the inner circle, the bullseye. He says it's much better to plant your arrows where you are, and then draw the circle around. Redefine your success according to your own terms. And so I think it's a little bit like that, where you don't want to get hung up on other people's definition of success, which often, I think, unfortunately, entails lots of money. You don't really want to have $1 billion. And so you want to redefine success in a way. And if you are really lucky, you'll be able to have a definition of success that nobody else has. It might include, whether it's, for me, it includes time. Having having control over my time is far more important than having lots of money. It's just, even that's the problem with having extreme versions of wealth, is that it's imprisoning, it's binding, it takes over their lives, and they actually don't have the time that I have. And so when I'm surrounded by billionaires, I like to joke that I'm the wealthiest person in the group, because I have total control over my time, which they don't, because they have responsibilities with that level of the money kind of takes over your life. So I'm just saying you can define your lives in different ways, and you can define success. And that should be something that you're working on, is what is your definition of a successful life, and having it reflect your own abilities and experiences and conditions. You'll be a lot closer to achieving that success.
Yeah, it's interesting, the time and money relationship. It seems like there's this default in the world where the assumption for not everyone, but a lot of people, is there's like a roughly set number of hours that one should work every week, and take a couple of weeks off for vacation, and then it's a certain number of hours every year, and then you do it for so many years and you retire, and it's just relatively like a set number of hours, and you sort of make as much money as you can is kind of the goal, the default goal, I think, for a lot of people. And an interesting way to flip it that I've thought about is like, you kind of want to, because I totally agree with you, and I don't think it's like correct necessarily or anything like that, but I just prioritize very similarly to how you're talking about, that I care much more about having the freedom and control over my time and being able to do, what I want to do, when I want to do it, where I want to do it, etc. And so the goal really is like, or at least part of the goal for me is like, I want to be able to earn as much money as I need, or like a little bit more than that with some buffer or something like that, while protecting the maximum amount of time that I can have control over of my own time. So it's like, rather than a set amount of time that you're working and maximizing money with that time, it's like, how much money do you need? And then maximizing time and trying to minimize the time it takes to earn that amount of money or whatever. And obviously, seeking financial freedom and stuff isn't a very unique objective. A lot of people want to get there, but I just think it's an interesting sort of way to flip it. And going back to your point about sort of thinking about, measuring success with your own ruler and not following an existing one that's out there. I think, people talk a lot about like, what's the meaning of life? What's my purpose? Things like this. And I've been somewhat skeptical of questions like that. I think they can be a little bit like language riddles or something like that, where there's like, certain implications that, I don't know, it's just like a very difficult question to answer because of the way that it is, like too abstract or something like that. But a few years ago, someone convinced me to, like, just as an exercise, try to define my purpose. And so I did that, and it was like hugely productive, actually, because I sort of started to think like, well, let's just give the benefit of the doubt to the idea that I do have a purpose. And I think this is within the realm of like, what's your ruler, and what can you be the only at, and things like this. So I defined it, and then what I realized was like a year and a half, 2 years later, what I had written, which resonated very strongly for a while and like helped drive me to do what I was doing, had become pretty stale. And not because like it wasn't great when I wrote it, but the circumstances of my life and my priorities had changed. And so I realized I sort of needed to like rewrite it. And then it took a while to like actually summon up the, desire or whatever to actually do it again. Like I didn't know what to write. And then sort of eventually I crafted a new one. And sure enough, it was like fresh and sort of resonated again. And it had a lot of themes of the old one still, but it had just sort of iterated. And so I'm curious, like you mentioned, you're never going to get there for like having your, the goal is like when you die, you have sort of like fully become yourself at that point. And so it's sort of an indefinite goal that you're driving towards. But have you, over the course of your life, maybe you don't call it purpose, maybe you call it your definition of success or something otherwise, but have you found that you've iterated on it over time? Have certain themes sort of maintained and others fallen away? Has it changed completely from like, being in your 20s to like being a father or things like that? I'm curious how it's evolved for you personally over time.
Yeah, I'm often think of, I hang around the Amish a little bit. I was studying how they use and decide to use or not to use technology. And one of the things is that they have a kind of a very, very strongly held criteria for evaluating success in their own lives. And that is their goal for most of them is to spend every meal with their children until they leave home. That means breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So they construct their lives and their schoolings around, so they have breakfast together as a family, lunch together as a family, dinner together as a family every day. And that's was sort of reminded me of, some of my goals with my kids, I have 3 kids, was to, maximize, success. Again, success was defining about, maximizing the number of meals with my family together without screens. And so, that was sort of what I would use as one of the definitions of success, was being able to do that on a very regular and consistent basis. We weren't like the Amish when having every meal, particularly lunch. That's the hard one, but the Amish would make that work too. I had a thought for your question about time. I wanted to kind of follow up, because there's another bit of advice in the book, which was related, which is that we often misunderstand a lot of productivity hacks of people who are trying to maximize their output by the minimum amount of time. So they will kind of like say, they'll want to reduce the amount of time that they spend on a task to make it more productive. And you were talking about, calculating the number of hours that you have to work. And most of the people are trying to reduce the number of hours that they work. And I think, excuse me, a better way to kind of construct your life is to aim for things where you want to increase the number of hours that you spend doing it. Projects where you are not trying to minimize the amount of time but where you're trying to spend as much time doing them. Like say you're a painter. You want to keep maximizing and changing your life so that you can maximize the number of hours that you spend painting, because it's so rewarding, so good. And for me, that's somewhat what, again, my definition of success is having tasks, having projects, having assignments where I want to spend as much time as possible doing them, rather than reducing it. It's like, that is for me the definition of success, is when you're working on something and you want to spend more time doing it rather than less. Another piece of advice from the book is the reward for work is more work. It's like, yeah, if I'm doing it as well, then the reward for this is I should be able to continue doing it. And that's a flip that, and not that many people think about, but for me, it's one of the definitions of success.
Yeah, it's talking about like the optimizing, I think that's an interesting reframe on it. And it makes me think about, like I think a lot of people, you don't want to live under like someone else's arbitrary rules that you don't get to choose. And like sometimes they may benefit you, but at the extremes, obviously you have like sort of no freedom, and no one wants that. But I think, in my experience, and I think a lot of people, is like rules can be extremely helpful if they're good rules, or if they are maybe rules that you set for yourself. Like you've had these, we talked about focus earlier, and part of your reframe on focus is doing something every day, or doing it sort of consistently as a habit. And over time, you do something over and over again, it'll, that is focus. It's not the, version where you're tuning out all distractions, but clearly if you're doing something over a long time, you've been focused on that thing. And, in some sense, that's kind of like a rule that you've made for yourself. Like, I'm going to do, you do like the Cool Tools podcast. You release an episode once a week. You blog daily for a very long time. And you sort of have these consistent cadences that you set for yourself, where at the macro level, like you have complete control. You picked that cadence and committed to that cadence. But at a micro level, day to day, you have some things that you've sort of committed to and signed up for that you've sort of are compelled to do. And again, you are the one who sort of like compelled yourself to do it. But nonetheless, like if you wanted to, on that day, you just woke up and felt like doing something like totally different, you might have sort of like these commitments you've set out for yourself. I guess the question I have is like, so when I think about that, you want like those pieces of work that you're doing, whether it's the podcast or the writing, there are things that you want to be doing, but on a given day, you may or may not want to, and you may sort of have to by virtue of committing to that thing. Does anything what I'm saying kind of make sense at all? Or I'm just trying to get at like when I talked about minimizing the time that you have that's income generating, like basically to sufficient needs or to a sufficient level. I think what I was getting at a little bit is to not feel like you absolutely have to do a certain thing, even if it's something that like you chose to do in the first place, to minimize the amount that you actually have to do. If one day you sort of wake up and change your mind because, you know, to use the Amish example, like your kids aren't around anymore. And so, you know, you're not going to have 3 meals a day, these Amish people with your kids. And so your priorities change, and maybe, you know, having these meals with your kids led you to wanting to, you know, create art at night or something. And with them gone, you're like, well, I'm not so into the art anymore or something like that. And you want to change, but you kind of can't because that's how you're making your living. So have you been able to, I guess, just trust in what you've done throughout your life, that following your work and doubling down on your interests and things like that, that you don't have to worry about sort of which pieces are generating income and things like that, that it all just sort of has worked itself out?
Yeah, I went to 1 year of college and dropped out, and that was 1971. And that was a fairly radical thing to do at that time, because the distinction between your life as a college graduate and not was much more severe and stark than it is now. And but when I did, I felt, well, I'm signing up for a life where I will basically always be poor. But I was really interested in the kind of the hippie vision of self-sufficiency. And so having control of my time was definitely what I thought I was signing up for, where I may not have very much money, but I have a lot of time. And time is, of the two, much more powerful to have. And so, we're all born with different circumstances, different amounts of luck. We have unfair advantages and disadvantages at birth, depending on where we are, gender, all these other issues. But I also know from just hanging around the poorest people on the planet when I was traveling in Asia, that were literally had no cash whatsoever, to know that this is true no matter where you were born, which is that it's better to have a lot of time than a lot of money if you're trying to construct a life that's interesting and remarkable, because most of the hurdles in what you want to do are not because of money. It's because of other things, because of your belief in whether they're possible, because of your description of it, because whether you have collaborators or you're trying to do it by yourself. There's just so many issues. And this is why most of the real breakthroughs in the world come from young people outside on the edges, not from the incumbents and the rich and the billionaires. They're not continuing to make all the great new things because they tend to want to try to buy these things with the money, and money is not what's needed. You need ingenuity, grit, determination, perseverance, friends, all these things, which the young and the poor have. And so, the advantage is I can be pretty clear. I've been saying this for a long time, that the next big thing is not going to come from Google, Microsoft, all those, GM, whatever. And it came from someone like OpenAI. It was a new startup. They're the ones driving the AI revolution right now. And the other contenders coming along would also be going to be outside the big companies, because they don't have the resources. And that is a kind of a weird kind of an advantage when you are trying to do the new innovation, the new things, the new successes. So, so I signed up for that by dropping out of college, and my expectation was, you kind of like, it was Walt Disney who said, we don't make movies to make money. We make money to make movies. And so, in a kind of a weird way, money is, is sort of a byproduct of doing the other things well and right. It's like, if you're after the money, you want the money first to do the thing, it doesn't usually work. You want to do the thing, and then the money will come to help you keep doing the thing. It's like my friend Tim Riley calls it gasoline. He says, yeah, you need the gas in the car to go on the trip, but the trip is not visiting gas stations trying to see how much gas you get. It's just like, no. So you do the thing, and doing the thing well can produce the money that will continue to allow you to keep doing the thing. But if you kind of say, well, the thing is to make as much money as possible so I can do the thing, that rarely works. Sometimes it works, but it rarely works. It's like there's a great movie, I think it's Wall Street Warriors or something, where the hero is saying, look, I'm going to work on Wall Street. I'm going to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to retire so I can buy a motorcycle and drive across China. And anybody who, all the travelers of the world like myself, is laugh. That's just hilarious, because you can work at McDonald's for 6 months to earn enough money to buy a motorcycle to ride across China, right? I mean, it's like that's just so backwards. So to do the thing, ride your motorcycle across China, and out of that will come something amazing that will help you continue to do things to enable you to ride across China twice, or backwards, or India, whatever. So that's my stick is that aim for the thing, and the byproduct of the thing would be the success that you want.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kevin. I know we're coming up on time, so we'll wrap it up here. But this has been a very helpful conversation for me personally, and hopefully it is for others as well. Reading the book in the first place was super helpful for me at this point in my life, and I'd encourage other people to go read it as well. You could get it on Amazon. Again, it's called Excellent Advice for Living. And then you can go and follow Kevin on Twitter at Kevin2Kelly. That's the number 2 in between his name, Kevin Kelly. And yeah, thanks again, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward even to just listening to this back myself, because there's a lot of deep advice in there, and sometimes you got to hear it twice to fully process. Yeah,
that's what these this little book is very easy to read, because there's just 450 little proverbs, and they're kind of more like reminders. A lot of it's ancient wisdom that's been channeled and rechanneled over the ages, and I'm just putting it into contemporary words into tweetable form. But there are maybe stuff that you've heard before, maybe not, but the stuff that you have heard is just serving as a little tiny memorable reminder. We need reminding of these, and I do too, just to kind of help make habits out of them. So I really appreciate and grateful for this opportunity to share my little bits of advice. I appreciate your great questions and the thought that you've given to it. And I wish you best success as you define it in your own life. Thank you.
Thank you.